The silence after the Queen spoke lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer than that. Every Xyl guard in the room turned their heads toward Elliot. Every human in the room turned their heads toward the Queen. Nobody understood what had just happened, except for Savara herself. Captain Mercer stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, what exactly do you mean?" Savara turned her golden eyes to the captain. "It is an old tradition among my people. When two species meet for the first time in Xyl space, the Queen may choose one member of the visiting group to stay aboard her ship. It is called the claiming. This person serves as a bridge between our kinds, a cultural bond, a sign of good faith." Mercer's face went hard. "And if we refuse? Then your ship will be escorted back to human space, and this meeting will be over. Your people will not pass through the Volanthi expanse. Not now, and not ever." Kyle Dawson put his hand on his sidearm, and two of the Xyl guards shifted their weight in response. Nora Bishop looked at Mercer with sharp eyes, waiting for an order. The crew was ready for a fight, but Mercer was smart enough to know that a fight with the Xyl inside their own territory would be suicide. "Who do you want?" Mercer asked through tight teeth. Savara raised one long sharp finger and pointed it across the room. "The quiet one, in the back." Every head turned to Elliot. He felt 41 pairs of human eyes land on him all at once, and for a moment, the silence was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat. Elliot blinked. He looked at the Queen's pointing finger, and then at the Queen herself, and then he said the only thing that came to his mind. "Me?" "Yes," Savara said. "You." Mercer shook her head. "Absolutely not. Elliot Grant is essential to our operations. He manages our entire systems network. Without him, this ship cannot function at full capacity." It was not entirely true, and everyone in the room knew it. Elliot was good at his job, but the ship had backup systems analysts. Mercer was protecting her crew the way she always did, with her teeth out and her back straight. Savara saw through the lie immediately, but she did not call it out. Instead, she smiled that slow alien smile and said, "I admire your loyalty, Captain, but my terms do not change. The quiet one comes with me, or you go home." The room buzzed with whispered arguments. Kyle wanted to fight. Nora wanted to negotiate. The crew was split between anger and fear. But while they all argued about his fate, Elliot did something that none of them expected. He stepped forward. The whispers stopped. Elliot walked through the crowd of his crewmates, and they parted around him like water around a stone. He walked all the way to the front of the room and stood between Captain Mercer and Queen Savara, and he looked up at the alien Queen with the same calm, steady eyes he always had. "I will go," he said. Mercer grabbed his arm. "Elliot, you do not have to do this." He looked at her, and for the first time, some of the crew saw something in his eyes that they had never noticed before. It was not fear. It was not resignation. It was curiosity. Deep and burning and alive. "It is fine, Captain," he said quietly, so that only she could hear. "I will learn more about them from the inside than we ever could from out here. This is why we came. To make contact. Let me make it." Mercer stared at him for a long moment. She did not want to let him go. Every instinct in her body told her to fight, but she could see in his eyes that he had already made his decision. And she had learned a long time ago that you cannot stop a man who has made peace with his choice. She let go of his arm. "You come back to us," she said. "That is an order." Elliot gave her a small nod, and then he turned and walked toward the Queen. Savara looked down at him. He was so much smaller than her. The top of his head barely reached her chest. Her guards could snap him in half without trying. But he walked toward her like he was walking into his own living room, and that made something shift behind her 4 golden eyes. "You are not afraid," she said. It was not a question. "I am very afraid," Elliot said honestly. "But I have learned that fear and curiosity can live in the same place. And right now, my curiosity is winning." Savara stared at him. Then she laughed. It was a strange sound, deep and clicking and layered, but it was a real laugh. Kythara, standing behind the queen, looked shocked. She had not heard her queen laugh in years. "Come then, quiet human," Savara said. "Let us see what your curiosity finds." Elliot followed the queen and her guards off the starward crest and onto the shuttle that would take them to the throne of Ivan. He did not look back. He wanted to, but he did not. Looking back would mean doubt, and he could not afford doubt right now. The throne of Ivan was even bigger on the inside than it looked from outside. The hallways were tall and wide, and built for creatures much larger than Elliot. The walls were made of a dark metal that seemed to breathe with a faint purple light. Everything hummed with a low vibration that Elliot could feel in his teeth. The air smelled different, sweet and sharp at the same time, like flowers mixed with copper. Zale crew members stopped and stared as Elliot walked past them. Some looked curious. Most looked disgusted. A few clicked their mandibles in what Elliot guessed was the Zhao version of laughing at someone. He was small and soft and pink, and he had no shell and no claws and no sharp edges anywhere on his body. To them, he must have looked like a meal. He was given a room near the Queen's chambers. It was large by human standards, but plain. A sleeping platform, a small table, a screen on the wall that showed the stars outside. No window, no lock on the door. Elliot sat on the edge of the sleeping platform and took a deep breath. He was alone on an alien ship, surrounded by creatures that could kill him without thinking about it. He had no weapons, no allies, and no way to call for help. But he had his eyes, and he had his patience, and in his experience, those two things had always been enough. He started watching, and within 3 days, he began to understand things about the jail that even the jail did not understand about themselves. The quiet human had arrived, and the throne of Ivan had no idea what that meant. 3 weeks passed, and Elliot Grant became the most talked about creature on the throne of Ivan, even though he barely talked at all. He spent his days walking through the ship. He sat in the back of court sessions, where Savara met with her advisors and commanders. He ate in the common halls, where the Zail soldiers gathered. He visited the engineering decks, and watched the workers maintain the ship's massive engines. He never asked questions. He never interrupted. He just watched, and listened, and remembered everything. The Zail did not know what to make of him. Most aliens who came aboard a Zail warship were either terrified or aggressive. Elliot was neither. He moved through the ship like smoke. He was there, and then he was not. Some of the crew started calling him the Ghost in their own language, and the name stuck. But not everyone found him amusing. Commander Draven was the highest-ranking warrior on the ship, after the Queen herself. He was massive even by jail standards, nearly 8 feet tall, with a shell that was dark as midnight and covered in scars from 100 battles. He had earned his rank by killing 3 rival commanders in single combat, and he wore their broken mandibles on a chain around his neck. Draven hated Elliot from the moment he saw him. He hated the way the human walked around freely on a jail ship. He hated that the Queen had given this soft little creature quarters near her own chambers. But most of all, he hated that Elliot never flinched. Every other alien that Draven had ever met showed fear when they saw him. Elliot just looked at him the same way he looked at everyone else, calmly and with mild interest. And that made Draven furious. "The Queen keeps a pet," Draven said one day in the common hall, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A soft-shelled pet that cannot fight and cannot speak and has no purpose on this ship." Elliot was sitting at a nearby table, eating a bland protein bar from his human rations. He heard every word. He said nothing. He just kept eating. But Elliot had not been wasting his time during those 3 weeks. Through watching alone, he had put together a map of the entire political structure of the Zale court. He knew which advisors supported Savara, and which ones resented her. He knew which commanders were loyal, and which ones wanted more power. He had memorized the patrol schedules of every guard shift on the ship. He had learned to read the tiny movements of Zale mandibles, and the shifting colors of their shells that revealed emotions they thought they were hiding. And he had noticed something wrong with one of the Queen's most trusted advisors. Advisor Velcris was an old Zale noble who had served the throne for over 50 years. He was thin and careful, and spoke with a smooth voice that made everything he said sound reasonable. Everyone trusted him. Savara trusted him more than most. But Elliot had been watching Velcris for days, and something did not add up. Velcris always left the court sessions 5 minutes before they ended. He positioned himself on the far side of the room, where Savara could not see his face directly. When anyone mentioned Queen Morthen, a rival queen of the Southern Hive, Velcris's mandibles twitched in a way that was different from everyone else. It was small, almost invisible, but Elliot saw it because Elliot saw everything. One evening, Savara summoned Elliot to her private chamber. It was the first time they had been alone together since he came aboard. The room was large and warm, and lit by floating orbs of soft blue light. Savara sat on a low seat that curved around her body like a nest. She looked tired. "What have your eyes found on my ship?" Elliot stood with his hands behind his back. He took a breath and said, "You have a traitor in your court." Savara's 4 eyes narrowed. "That is a serious thing to say." "It is a serious thing to find," Elliot replied. "Who?" "Advisor Velcris." The Queen went still. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "Velcris has served me for 50 years. He was my mother's advisor before mine. You have been here for 3 weeks. "I know," Elliot said. "The 3 weeks of watching has shown me things that 50 years of trust has hidden from you." He laid out everything. The timing of Velcris's absences, the way he avoided the Queen's direct gaze when certain topics came up, the mandible twitch when Morthen's name was spoken, the fact that Velcris had been seen near the long-range communication array during off hours 3 times in the past week. Savara listened without moving. When Elliot finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If you are wrong about this, I will send you back to your people in pieces." "If I am wrong about this," Elliot said, "I will walk into the airlock myself." Savara set a trap. She told Velcris, and only Velcris, about a fake fleet movement, a supply convoy heading through a specific corridor at a specific time. She told no one else. Within 12 hours, Morthen's raiders appeared at that exact corridor, waiting for a convoy that did not exist. Velcris was arrested that night. He screamed his innocence as the guards dragged him away, but the proof was undeniable. The court was shaken to its core. An advisor who had been trusted for half a century had been a spy all along, and it took a human who had been there for 3 weeks to see it. Savara found Elliot in the observation deck afterward. He was looking at the stars, as he always did. She stood beside him and said nothing for a while. Then she spoke. "My warriors trained for years to protect this throne. My spies spent decades learning to uncover lies, and you, a soft little human with no claws and no armor, found what none of them could find. How?" Elliot did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the stars. "I just pay attention," he said. "People think that silence is emptiness. It is not. Silence is a room with all the doors open. You hear everything when you stop making noise." Savara studied him. Something had changed in the way she looked at him. Before there had been curiosity and fascination. Now there was something deeper, something that looked a lot like respect. But peace did not last long. The next morning, Commander Draven stormed into the court and challenged Elliot to a Zale honor duel. He said the human had shamed the warrior class by doing their job for them. He demanded blood. He is under my protection. But Elliot stepped forward again, just as he had done on the starward crest. I accept, he said. The court gasped. Draven grinned. Savara stared at Elliot like he had lost his mind. The duel took place in the combat ring, a circular arena with low gravity and hard walls. Draven was a mountain of dark shell and rage. Elliot was a small, pale human in borrowed clothes. Draven attacked first. He was fast for his size. His bladed arms cut through the air with a sound like tearing fabric. But Elliot was not there. He had already moved. He ducked low and slid sideways, using the low gravity to glide across the floor. Draven swung again. Elliot dodged again, and again, and again. Elliot never attacked, not once. He just moved. He had spent days watching Draven train, and he knew every pattern. He knew which side the commander favored. He knew that Draven dropped his left guard after a heavy swing. He knew that the commander's carapace had a thin spot behind the knee where an old wound had healed badly. He did not strike that spot. He did not need to. He just kept dodging and waiting and letting Draven burn through his energy. After 10 minutes of swinging at empty air, Draven was gasping. His movements slowed. His strikes lost their edge. And then his legs gave out, and he crashed to the floor of the ring, exhausted, beaten by a man who had never thrown a single punch. Elliot stood over him. He was breathing a little harder than normal, but his eyes were calm. He reached down and offered his hand. Draven stared at that hand for a long time. Then he took it. The Zale in the arena did not know what to say. They had never seen anything like it. A warrior defeated not by a stronger warrior, but by a man who simply refused to fight and let patience do the work. Savara watched from her seat above the arena. Her golden shell glowed in the light. She said nothing, but Kythara, standing beside her, saw the look on the queen's face and understood something that the rest of the court did not. The queen had not just claimed a human. She had claimed something far more dangerous than any warrior. She had claimed a mind that could see through walls and a patience that could outlast stone. And Kythara wondered if even the queen truly understood what she had brought aboard her ship. The attack came 36 hours after Velkris was arrested, and it came hard. Queen Morthen of the Southern Hive was not the kind of ruler who waited for things to go wrong. The moment she lost contact with her spy, she knew the game was over, and she decided that if she could not win through deception, she would win through fire. Her fleet had been hiding in the Dravos Nebula for months, 200 warships packed tight in the clouds of gas and dust, waiting for the signal that never came. So Morthen gave a different signal. Attack. The first wave hit the throne of Evane like a hammer. The massive hive carrier shook from bow to stern. Alarms screamed through every corridor. Lights flickered and died and came back red. Crew members scrambled to battle stations. Fighters launched from their bays in swarms. Elliot was in his room when the first explosion hit. The force of it threw him off his sleeping platform and onto the floor. He got up, wiped blood from a cut on his forehead, and ran toward the war room. When he arrived, the scene was chaos. Savara's commanders were shouting over each other. Tactical displays showed the incoming fleet, and the numbers were bad. Morthen had brought more than double the firepower that Savara had at her disposal. The throne of Ivaean was the biggest ship in the sector, but it was one ship against a fleet, and the math did not work. Commander Draven was there, fully armored and ready for battle. Since the duel, he had stopped insulting Elliot. He did not exactly respect him yet, but he had stopped pretending the human did not exist. General Thyrak, the old veteran who led Savara's military forces, was arguing for a retreat. "We cannot win this, my queen. We must fall back to the core systems and regroup." Commander Solara, a young and aggressive officer, slammed her fist on the table. "We do not run. We charge their center and break through. Zael, do not retreat. Zael also do not throw their lives away for pride," Thyrak fired back. The argument went back and forth. Savara sat at the head of the table with her jaw tight and her 4 eyes burning. She needed a plan, and her commanders were giving her noise. Elliot stepped into the war room. Nobody had invited him. A few of the officers looked at him with irritation. General Thyrak opened his mouth to tell him to leave. "Let him speak," Savara said. The room went quiet. Elliot walked to the tactical display. He studied it for 30 seconds without saying a word. His eyes moved across the holographic map of the battle, tracking ship positions, fleet formations, firing patterns, and movement vectors. Everyone watched him in silence. Then he began. "Morthen's fleet is arranged in a crescent formation," he said. His voice was calm and even, as if he were reading a weather report. "The wings are heavy with destroyers, and the center is anchored by her flagship. There's a gap between the left wing and the center. It looks like a weakness, but it is not. It is a trap. If you send your ships into that gap, they will be surrounded on 3 sides. She wants you to charge." That is exactly what Commander Solara is suggesting, and it is exactly what Morthen is hoping for. Solara bristled, but said nothing. Elliot continued. "The flagship is here." He pointed to a position near the back of the enemy formation. "I have been monitoring communication patterns from the long-range array since I came aboard. Morthen's fleet uses a centralized command structure. Every ship receives its orders from the flagship. If you cut the flagship's communication array, the fleet loses coordination. Without orders, each captain will have to act on their own, and a fleet of 200 ships with no unified command is just 200 confused ships. How do we get to the flagship? It is behind their entire fleet." "You do not go through the fleet," Elliot said. "You go around it. The Dravos Nebula is still behind them. Their sensors are already partially blinded by the gas. If you send a small strike team of 3 fast ships into the nebula, they can circle behind the fleet and hit the flagship from the rear. Morthen will not expect it, because no Zael commander has ever used the nebula for a flanking attack. Your people consider it dishonorable to attack from hiding." "Because it is dishonorable," Draven growled. "Morthen just sent 200 ships to kill your queen from a hiding spot in that same nebula," Elliot said without looking at Draven. "I think we are past honor." Draven went quiet. "While the strike team moves through the nebula," Elliot continued, "the throne of Ivaean acts as bait. You are the biggest target here. Morthen wants you dead most of all. Move the throne forward slowly. Draw her fleet in. Make them focus everything on this ship. The angrier Morthen gets, the tighter she will pull her formation, and the more exposed her flagship becomes from behind." Savara looked at the display. Then she looked at Elliot. Then she looked at her commanders. "Does anyone have a better plan?" Nobody spoke. "Then we follow the humans' plan," Savara said. "Draven, you lead the strike team. Take your 3 fastest ships and go through the nebula." Draven looked at Elliot for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but something close to understanding. The commander nodded and left the room. The battle that followed lasted 4 hours, and it was the worst 4 hours that anyone on the throne of Ivaean had ever lived through. The great ship moved forward into the teeth of Morthen's fleet. The enemy pounded it with everything they had. Hull sections cracked open and vented air into space. Fires broke out on 6 decks. The medical bays filled with wounded faster than the doctors could work. Through all of it, Elliot stood in the war room and guided the fight. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms. He spoke in the same quiet, steady voice he always used. And somehow in the middle of all that destruction and noise, his calm became the only thing that kept the room from falling apart. "Shift power to the forward shields," he said. "Let the port side take damage. They are hitting us there because they think it is our weak side. It is not. Let them waste their fire. Pull Fighter Wing 3 back to the ship. They are overextended, and Morthen's destroyers are about to cut them off. Tell engineering to reroute the secondary reactor to weapons. We do not need full life support on decks 9 through 12. Those decks are already empty." The Zale officers followed his instructions, not because they were ordered to, but because every single thing he said turned out to be right. He saw the battle the way a chess player sees a board, not just the piece in front of him, but every piece and every possible move 5 steps ahead. 2 hours into the battle, Draven's strike team emerged from the nebula behind Morthen's fleet. 3 small fast ships against 1 massive flagship. The odds were terrible, but Draven was the best warrior the Zale had ever produced, and he had something he had never had before. He had a plan, made by someone who saw what others could not. The strike team hit the flagship's communication array with everything they had. The array exploded in a bloom of white fire, and just like Elliot had predicted, the entire enemy fleet fell apart. Ships that had been working together in perfect formation suddenly began moving on their own. Some retreated, some charged forward, some crashed into each other. Savara gave the order to counterattack. The throne of Ivan, battered and bleeding, but still alive, surged forward. The Zale fleet rallied around their queen and drove into the confused enemy like a spear into broken glass. Morthen's fleet scattered. Her flagship, crippled and burning, turned and ran. The Southern Hive's great attack was over. When the last enemy ship disappeared into the nebula, the war room fell silent. Officers slumped in their chairs. Some of them were shaking. The throne of Ivan was badly damaged, and hundreds of Zale had died, but the ship was still flying, and the queen was still alive. And that was because of a plan made by a quiet human who had never held a weapon in his life. Elliot did not celebrate. He did not cheer or shout or pound the table. He simply stood up from the tactical display and walked out of the war room without a word. Savara found him later on the observation deck. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, looking out at the stars through the viewport. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his legs to make them stop. Savara sat down beside him. She was enormous next to him. Her golden shell still had dust and debris on it from the battle. They sat together in silence for a long time. "People died because of my plan," Elliot said finally. His voice was barely a whisper. "People would have died without it," Savara replied. "Many more people. Everyone on this ship." "That does not make it easier." "No," Savara said. "It does not." They sat in silence again. The stars turned slowly outside the viewport. Somewhere deep in the ship, the engines hummed and groaned as repair crews fought to keep them running. "My people believe that the loudest voice commands the battlefield," Savara said softly. "You have shown them that the quietest voice can command an empire." Elliot looked at her. His eyes were tired and sad, but underneath the sadness, there was still that same steady calm that had drawn her to him in the first place. "I did not command anything," he said. "I just saw what was there." Savara looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that no Jael queen had done in recorded history. She reached over and placed her hand over his. Her sharp fingers curled gently around his small human hand. Her shell was warm and smooth against his skin. "Thank you, Elliot," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He looked down at their hands, and then back at her face, and for once in his life, the quiet man had nothing to say at all. The news spread fast. It moved through the Zale Dominion like fire through dry grass, and then it jumped to human space and burned even faster. A single human on a Zale warship had uncovered a traitor, defeated a champion warrior without throwing a punch, and designed the battle plan that crushed Queen Morthin's invasion fleet. And he had done all of it without raising his voice. The Starward Crest returned to Zale space 2 weeks after the battle. Captain Diane Mercer had spent every day since the claiming trying to find a way to get Elliot back. She had sent messages, filed diplomatic protests, and even considered a rescue mission that Kyle Dawson had been quietly planning behind her back. But when the Starward Crest docked with the throne of Ivan, and Mercer walked aboard the alien ship, she found something that stopped her in her tracks. Elliot was standing on the command deck beside the Queen's throne. He was wearing the same plain clothes he always wore. He still looked like the Quiet systems analyst who used to eat lunch alone. But everything around him had changed. Zyle officers nodded to him as they passed. Guards stepped aside when he walked. Even Commander Draven, who stood nearby with his arms crossed, gave Elliot a look that was unmistakably one of respect. "What happened to you?" Mercer whispered when she reached him. "I paid attention," Elliot said with a small shrug. "Same thing I always do." Mercer looked at him, and then at the Queen, and then back at him. She had 100 questions, but she was smart enough to see that the situation had grown far beyond a simple hostage rescue. Elliot was not a prisoner. He was something else entirely. That same day, Savara called a formal assembly in the great court of the throne of Ivan. The room was filled with Zyle nobles, commanders, advisors, and warriors. Kithara stood at the Queen's side with a ceremonial staff in her hands. The Starward Crest crew was allowed to attend, and they stood together in a group near the entrance, watching with wide eyes. Savara rose from her throne, and the room fell absolutely silent. "For 2,000 years," she began, "the title of Valith has been the highest honor a queen can give. It means chosen voice. It is a rank above commanders, above advisors, second only to the throne itself. In all the history of the Zale Dominion, the Valith has always been one of our own kind." She paused and looked at Elliot, who was standing at the base of the throne steps. "Today that changes." A murmur rippled through the court. Savara raised her hand and it stopped. Elliot Grant came to this ship as a stranger. He had no claws, no armor, no weapons. He could not fight our warriors, or match our strength. Many of you laughed at him. Some of you wanted him thrown out of an airlock. But while you were laughing, he was watching. While you were talking, he was listening. And while you were blind to the rot in our own court, he saw it, and he cut it out. She stepped down from the throne and walked toward Elliot. Every eye in the room followed her. He found a traitor that 50 years of loyalty had hidden. He stood in the combat ring against our greatest warrior, and defeated him with nothing but patience. And when 200 ships came to destroy us, he stood in our war room and gave us the plan that saved this ship, and every life on it. She stopped in front of Elliot and looked down at him. He looked up at her. "I name you Valith," Savara said, "chosen voice of the Zahel Dominion. My voice when I cannot speak. My eyes when I cannot see. My mind when the noise of the world is too loud for even a queen to think." Kithara stepped forward and placed a thin band of golden metal around Elliot's wrist. It was warm against his skin, and it hummed faintly like a living thing. Elliot looked at the band, and then at the Queen. Then he looked across the room at Captain Mercer and his old crewmates. Mercer's eyes were shining. Kyle Dawson was standing with his mouth open. Nora Bishop had her hand over her heart. He was standing between two worlds, the one he came from and the one that had claimed him. He could go back. He could return to the Starward Crest and eat his meals alone and read his books and be invisible again. Nobody would blame him. But he had learned something in his weeks on this ship. He had learned that being quiet was not the same as being invisible. Being quiet meant you could hear the things that mattered. It meant you could see the cracks before they became breaks, and the sparks before they became fires. And right now, the crack between humans and Zale was wide and dangerous, and someone needed to stand in that gap and hold the two sides together. "I accept," he said. The court reacted in different ways. Some of the Zale cheered by clicking their mandibles in rapid patterns. Some stayed silent with doubt on their faces. Draven slammed his fist against his chestplate in the Zale sign of warrior respect. Over the next 6 months, Elliot did something that no diplomat, no general, and no politician had been able to do in the history of human space travel. He negotiated the first treaty between the Zale Dominion and the human collective. He did not do it with loud speeches or threats or tricks. He did it the way he did everything, quietly. He sat in rooms with Zale nobles and human ambassadors, and he listened to both sides. He found what each side needed, and what each side feared. He built the treaty word by word, line by line, like a man building a bridge one stone at a time. The treaty gave humans access to the Volanthi Expanse, the richest trade corridor in the Outer Rim. It gave them Zale technology that was centuries ahead of human science. In return, the Zale gained human creativity and adaptability, things that their ancient and rigid culture had lost over thousands of years. Both sides gained a military alliance that made the combined human-Zale force the most powerful in the known galaxy. The human governments were stunned. Some had been preparing for war with the Zale. Instead, they got the greatest diplomatic victory in human history, delivered by a man that most of his own crew used to forget was in the room. On the day the treaty was signed, Elliot stood on a stage in front of representatives from both species. Cameras recorded every moment. Billions of humans and Zale watched across dozens of star systems. When it was his turn to speak, Elliot walked to the podium. He looked out at the massive crowd. He paused for a very long time. Long enough that some people began to shift in their seats. Then he said, "I am not a soldier. I am not a politician. I am not brave or strong or special in any way that anyone would notice. I am just a man who learned to be quiet in a loud universe. And I think maybe that is something worth being." He stepped down. That was it. 12 seconds of speaking. It was the shortest speech in the history of interspecies diplomacy, and it became the most famous. Months later, the throne of Ivane and the starward crest flew side by side along the border of known space. They were the first ships of a joint human-Zale patrol fleet. Behind them, more ships followed, human and Zyle together, moving through stars that neither species could have reached alone. Elliot stood on the observation deck of the throne of Ivane. It had become his favorite place on the ship. The stars outside the viewport were thick and bright and endless. Savara came and stood beside him. They did this often now, standing together in silence, watching the stars, not needing to say anything, because they had both learned that some things were better left unspoken. But tonight Savara broke the silence. "Do you ever regret being chosen?" she asked. Elliot thought about it. He thought about the starward crest and his small room full of screens. He thought about the protein bars and the lonely meals and the books on his datapad. He thought about the life he had left behind, quiet and safe and invisible. Then he thought about the golden band on his wrist, and the court that now listened when he spoke, and the treaty that had changed the shape of the galaxy. He thought about the Zale, who had gone from mocking him to respecting him. He thought about Draven, who now called him brother. He thought about Kythara, who brought him tea every morning, even though humans did not drink Zale tea, and it tasted like hot metal. And he thought about the Queen standing next to him, the ancient and powerful being who had looked across a room full of noise and chosen the one person who made none. "I was never chosen because I was special," Elliot said. "I was chosen because I was paying attention. Anyone can do that. Most people just choose not to." Savara smiled. It was still a strange sight, a Zale queen smiling. But Elliot had gotten used to it. He had gotten used to a lot of strange things. "And that," Savara said, "is exactly what makes humans terrifying." Elliot laughed softly. It was a quiet laugh. Of course it was. Below them the stars stretched out forever. Somewhere in all that light and darkness and silence, the galaxy was learning a lesson that one alien queen had already figured out. Humans were loud. Humans were wild and chaotic, and short-lived and messy. But every now and then, once in a great while, you found one who was quiet. And the quiet ones were the most dangerous of all. Not because they could fight, but because they could see. And a mind that sees everything is worth more than 1,000 swords. The Queen had known it from the first moment, and now the galaxy knew it too. The year was 2387, and the human ship called Starbound Crest was flying through the darkest part of space that any human had ever reached. It was a big ship, with 42 people on board, and all of them had a job to do. They were soldiers, and doctors, and engineers, and pilots. They talked loud, they laughed loud, they walked with their chests out and their heads high, because that is what humans did when they were far from home, and scared but did not want to show it. Captain Diane Mercer was the one in charge. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and a voice that could cut through metal. She had fought in 2 wars and survived things that would break most people. Her crew loved her because she never asked them to do anything she would not do herself. She kept them alive, and she kept them moving, and that was enough. But there was one man on the ship who did not fit with the rest of them. His name was Elliot Grant. He was the systems analyst, which meant he sat in a small room full of screens and made sure the ship's computers were running right. He was good at his job. Very good. But nobody really noticed him, because Elliot never made noise. He did not laugh loud in the mess hall. He did not argue during meetings. He did not go to the crew gatherings, or play cards, or tell stories about home. He ate alone. He read old books on his datapad. He walked through the hallways like a shadow, and most of the crew forgot he was even there. Captain Mercer had tried many times to bring him out. She would invite him to dinner with the senior officers, or ask him to join the movie nights in the common room. Elliot always smiled, and said no thank you, and went back to his screens. Some of the crew thought he was strange. Some thought he was shy. A few thought he was broken in some way that they could not see. But the truth was simpler than any of that. He liked watching people more than talking to them. He liked listening more than speaking. And in a universe full of noise, he had learned that the ones who stayed silent usually saw the most. None of that mattered until the day the Starbound Crest flew into Gyal space. The Gyal were not like anything humans had ever seen before. They were tall, almost 7 feet, with bodies that looked like someone had taken an insect and stretched it into the shape of a person. Their skin was a hard shell that shimmered in colors of dark blue and green and purple. Their arms ended in hands that had long, sharp fingers like blades. Their faces had 4 eyes, 2 large and 2 small, and their mouths had mandibles that clicked when they spoke. They were old. Their empire had existed for thousands of years before humans even learned how to make fire. And they were led by queens. The ship that stopped the Starbound Crest was enormous. It was called the Throne of Ivan, and it was bigger than anything human engineers had ever built. It blocked out the stars when it came close. Captain Mercer stood on the bridge and looked at it, and for the first time in a long time she felt small. A message came through. The Zale Queen wanted to board the human ship. She wanted to see these creatures that had come into her territory. Mercer had no choice. She agreed. Queen Savara came aboard with 12 of her royal guards. She was taller than the rest of her kind, and her shell was the color of dark gold. She moved slowly and with purpose, like every step she took was a decision. Her 4 eyes scanned the room and missed nothing. Captain Mercer had gathered the crew in the main hall. She gave a speech. It was a good speech. She talked about humanity's strength and courage and their desire for peace and friendship. She spoke with fire in her voice and stood straight and proud. The crew behind her did the same. Lieutenant Kyle Dawson, the head of security, stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Dr. Nora Bishop stood beside him, with a look on her face that said she was not afraid of anything. The whole crew was a wall of confidence and noise and human pride. Savara watched all of it. She listened to every word. Her guards stood still as statues behind her. When Mercer finished her speech, the Queen said nothing for a long time. The silence made everyone uncomfortable. Then Savara's eyes moved. They drifted away from the captain, and away from the soldiers, and away from all the loud, proud humans standing at the front of the room. Her gaze traveled slowly to the very back wall, where one man stood alone, with his hands at his sides and his mouth closed. Elliot Grant was not standing at attention. He was not puffing his chest or tightening his jaw. He was just standing there, watching. His eyes were calm and steady, and they were looking right back at the Queen, without fear and without challenge. He was just observing her, the same way he observed everything else, quietly, patiently, like he had all the time in the world. Savara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt curious. She leaned toward her advisor, a thin Zael female named Kythara, who had served the Queen for over 60 years. Kythara was wise and careful, and she knew her Queen better than anyone. "That one," Savara whispered. Her voice was low and smooth, like stone sliding over stone. "The one in the back, the quiet one." Kythara looked at Elliot, and then back at the Queen with confusion on her face. "Him, my Queen? He is the smallest of them. He has shown no strength. He has not spoken a single word." Savara kept her eyes on Elliot. A slow smile spread across her face, and her mandibles clicked softly. "That is exactly why," she said. "Look at the others. They are all performing. They are all pretending to be brave. But that one in the back is not pretending anything. He is not afraid. He is not trying to impress me. He is watching me the same way I am watching him." Kythara tilted her head. "What do you want with him?" Savara straightened up to her full height. Her golden shell caught the light, and for a moment she looked like something out of a dream. "That human will be mine," the Queen said. And across the room, Elliot Grant, the quietest man on a ship of 42, felt the weight of 4 golden eyes settle on him like the pull of gravity from a dying star. He did not look away. He did not flinch. He just looked back at the alien Queen and thought to himself that this was going to be very interesting. He had no idea how right he was.